All right. So, Steve Manzi, welcome to Uncivil Society. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Steve and I have known each other for a quarter century, and we've worked in civil society, philanthropy, nonprofit management, fundraising, communications, all of the things. That's a long time, Steve.
Yeah, a lot of changes in the world
Very
over
much
that
so.
time period,
Very much so.
not just in philanthropy, but in the world at large.
Well, and I think that they are closely connected. And as we are in the waning days of 2025 and kind of looking forward to what we might expect in 2026, I thought it would be nice to have this conversation just to discuss what feels kind of like a major inflection point for civil society, for the kind of partnership between government and nonprofits and the corporate sector or the private sector, that has been the stage for all the advances that we've seen in humanity since we were little kids. So I thought we might delve into that, and Steve and I plan to go over sort of five key areas as we look ahead to what's coming up. And Steve, just to start out, I wonder if you agree with me that this does feel like a hinge year for civil society.
It does because of the lack of government funding, the cessation of government funding for so many nonprofit institutions of all kinds, whether they be major universities or whether they be small community radio stations like WOMR in Provincetown, which lost like almost 20% of its very small budget because of the cessation of support from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So I think it's being felt across the sector, and even organizations that aren't necessarily the recipients of government funding, I think are going to feel it because the organizations that are going to be so aggressive out of necessity for support that donors are going to have to make some hard decisions, I think, about where their support will have the most impact in both the short and long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And, public broadcasting is a great example. I mean, in some ways, one of the most extreme examples because it subsisted at least, in part, maybe half because of public funding. And when that public funding disappears, when the will to support, culture, news, music, etc., from the public side disappears, at least temporarily, it leaves a tremendous mark. And you mentioned donors. So the first topic we want to talk about is something that I've been calling billionaire philanthropy. And Steve, you have been saying, because you and I have been in many conversations and meetings over the past few years, where I've heard you say that in major gift fundraising and campaign fundraising, it used to be an 80-20 rule where 80% of the resources raised would come from 20% of the donors, but I believe you have noticed that has shifted.
Yeah, in some cases it's 99-1.
Yeah.
The billionaires, it's not a uniform group. There
Yes.
are some who are insistent on bringing their own ideas to the table, which in some cases can be helpful, in some cases is almost antithetical to what the organization's specific needs and plans are. On the other hand, you have people like Ruth Gottesman, who made $1 billion gift to the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. There's no naming there. I mean,
Mm.
it's so that it's a tuition-free institution now for medical students. So, I mean, I'm not privy to all the details behind that, but it seems like just an absolutely wonderful, almost selfless gift that could have a huge impact on medicine and the ability of students to pursue careers there.
No, absolutely. And I think there are many flavors. And obviously for the nonprofits that we have worked for, yourself at the Metropolitan Museum, the New York Public Library, and many different clients as a consultant, and for myself as a consultant, we want those billionaire dollars. I mean, those are,
Yeah,
we can say sometimes the donors might have too much power to decide which programs are going to move forward and which programs are not. Nonetheless, private philanthropy and the billionaire culture that has grown up in this country is important to supporting, you know, these foundations.
I always joke about the Willie Sutton theory of fundraising, and I think you know who Willie Sutton was. He was a bank robber, I think, in
Yeah.
the late 40s, early 50s, and he kept robbing banks and kept getting arrested. And I don't know if it's an apocryphal story or not, but supposedly a reporter said to him, Willie, why do you keep robbing the banks? And he says, it's because it's where they keep the money. So with the accumulation of money in the billionaire sector, we have to keep those people constantly in mind and think about how we can engage them in the most effective way.
I agree. And, everybody's favorite billionaire funder is Mackenzie Scott these days because she gives general operating money and she gives to the institution and she signals her support with mega gifts that are really structural in nature. On the negative side with Mackenzie Scott is basically you can't apply for a grant. There's not a lot of transparency
Yeah.
there. You sort of have to be lucky enough to have the consulting company that shall be unnamed in this broadcast approach you for to kick the tires.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a little bit tricky. However, I've had experience with people, maybe not billionaires, but centimillionaires who kind of very quietly, I'm thinking of one couple in particular, who give a seven-figure gift annually to an institution, completely unrestricted, completely anonymously. And, I always refer to them to their faces as the patron saints of unrestricted giving, because the unrestricted giving is what's so essential to nonprofit institutions of all kinds. And I know there's kind of, you go on Charity Navigator or whatever, and you see, oh, this institution's got 3% overhead, and this one's got a 15% overhead in terms of operational funding, and oh, I'm going to give to the 3% one, but you have to dig a little deeper. And even the people behind Charity Navigator several years ago, collectively with some other groups, put out a statement saying, some of the institutions that have, the smaller operational costs are serving significantly fewer people than the organizations that are serving
Exactly.
more people and have consequently have a higher operating cost.
Yeah, and especially if you're going to support an organization that is, kind of an ongoing um, institution, whether direct services or cultural or healthcare or something like that, the sustainability of the organization in future years is important, and you have to spend money to have that sustainability. I say this in my class at Columbia all the time. By far, the largest expense in the nonprofit sector, people think of it as the voluntary sector, but it's people. It's paying for people to do the work, and you want good people. You want them to be well trained, to have professional development, and to be committed to the work.
You want donors to feel trust in the institution, and you have to build that trust. And I mean, when like that couple that I said to them, "Why do you do this?" And they said, "You know how to use the money better than we would if we were giving, if
Yeah,
we were trying to restrict it."
yeah,
So when I do my meager philanthropy personally, I want the institution, if the institution feels that the best use of this is to give the maintenance staff coffee and donuts every Friday or something like that, I trust them
right,
to know
right.
how to use those monies most effectively.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. Let's move on to number two, which really should be number one. It's what we've witnessed over the past year, which I take as a coordinated attack on the nonprofit sector by the federal administration in Washington. Do you think that we are witnessing a structural effort to actively weaken civil society?
Yeah, I kind of sort of do, Tom.
Yeah,
It's as if nonprofits have been cast as evil on some level because they're serving communities. I really don't understand this. I mean, I'm an old guy. I'll be 67 in a few weeks, and to see this kind of change in the way that nonprofits and respected institutions are viewed, governmentally and by the supporters of the government, and the government's current approach. It's really really upsetting. It seems to me that there's an intent to break community apart in some
mm,
level. And, there's nothing more important in society. And I'm speaking, as the know all of everything, but there's nothing more important than community. I had a friend who used to say that the breakdown and the political divide in society was caused by air conditioning. And I was like, what are you talking about? He said, before there was air conditioning, people used to sit out on their front porches and talk to their neighbors, and there'd be
Right.
things you'd agree with and things you wouldn't agree with. But you had a sense of who these people were. And that's what community is. And of course, with our pals, these guys here, it's driven us further down certain rabbit holes in certain directions. But I do think that there is an effort to to break that apart.
It's almost like to your point, a community effort to do something good is considered bad by this ideological group, although I'd have a hard time describing exactly what it stands for. But it tends to hook on things like fairness, um, diversity, equity, inclusion, to name a
Yeah.
few, suddenly hot button issues. And, the idea that billionaires should use their money to do good things. Some do, and some do not. One key ally of the administration, Elon Musk, to me is not a strong philanthropist, doesn't give a lot of money away. And it just seems to be driven by this, like trying to break down a part of society that they didn't really like. The idea of people actually working together to help people.
Or they didn't understand, maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe some of the burden is on the nonprofits to better tell their stories in a more compelling way. I'm not talking about fictionalizing the stories, obviously, but really getting the word out about what they do and what it means to society. I think
Yeah.
that's really, really, really important.
I mean, that is always a challenge. And since I've been working in philanthropy, which is about as long as I've known you, Steve, storytelling has always been something that nonprofits are trying to do a better job with. Getting stories from the field work to the community, to donors, to funders, and that has always been a challenge. But it also feels like this goes well beyond it. There's a malign aspect to it that has to do with our democracy too, because in the United States we have a thriving, or we've had historically since the Second World War, a growing and thriving nonprofit sector, which is now 10% of the employment base of the United States. Americans give away more than 2% of GDP every single year. And it is a huge part of what constitutes civil society in this country. So I think there is a sense of sort of weakening that. Some people do not like this agreement that government should work with private nonprofit organizations to do things. Some of that's on the left, by the way, but it's rampant on the right at this particular moment. So I'm just not sure. It's very hard to go out there and say institutions are great. Let's support, the establishment. We need it. That's a
Yeah.
hard argument to make.
Yeah, I mean, but just to go back to that little more than 2%. I mean, the sad part is that stays level. It doesn't seem to really. It bounces up and down a little bit every
A
year,
little
but it
bit.
doesn't really increase. And my gut, and from my quick read of Giving USA, the annual report on philanthropy, is that more and more of that 2% is being driven by very, very large gifts,
Great point.
and
Yes.
I'm concerned about the loss of small gifts, especially
Yes.
with the way that incomes are growing and not growing at various levels of the economic spectrum.
That is a great point. I mean, you've got the gap in income, the wealth inequality in our society is definitely growing. And to your point, while the total looks pretty good, in the hundreds of billions of dollars, the number of donors, the actual number, the raw number of people making donations to 501(c)(3) nonprofits has declined. So if you look ahead and if you subtract a few billionaires from that equation, it could be pretty dire.
Yeah, yeah, that would be.
I
That would
mean, we've talked about this many times, including when we first got together as consultants, but a culture of philanthropy in the country or in institutions is such an important aspect. The idea that we're all in this together, the community aspect. And if it's just billionaires floating it or the government floating it without the involvement of the everyday person, that's going to be a tough road for the nonprofit sector.
yeah.
Which leads me to our third topic, and I wanted to talk about careers in nonprofits because I just concluded teaching a class at Columbia this semester. I had wonderful students, a lot of them kind of early mid-career students, and they focused in on it's very interesting focused in on the idea that that people are drawn to our sector because they're willing to make less money just to do good, and they're almost like quasi volunteers, and they understandably, and I think this is completely valid, feel the idea that there should be some sort of discount or that it's not a significant career to work in the nonprofit sector for your career or as a consultant to the nonprofit sector is something that needs to be pushed back on. And it's interesting because it does tie, I think, to some of what you would hear from certain ideological groups, both left and right, who would say, no, no, the government should provide everything, or it should all be laissez-faire, free market driven, et cetera. But here you have a huge group of workers, the third largest group of workers in the United States, who feel like they have to accept a generosity discount for their work. Do you have thoughts about that? And you've worked with a lot of younger people over the past couple of decades inside major institutions. What do you see there?
It is a choice. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a decision to work at a nonprofit because typically the salaries, and they can vary. They can vary very 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 much. I want to just be be clear there. You know, if you're working for a major hospital system, or if you're working for a major university, for example, those salaries can be, reasonably. You're not going to become a billionaire or a multimillionaire doing that, but you could have, mid six figure salaries at the upper end as you work your way up there. For social service agencies, that's a little that those kinds of salaries typically are not the case. So I find that um, people who are committed to the mission of the institution and at the same time are treated decently, not just financially, but by their managers, by the institution in general, will stay with nonprofits if they have a particular attachment to it. You know, I was talking to one of the students in your class who had a brother who had a particular illness, and he is going to do work when he graduates with that with an institution
Hmm.
dealing with that specific
Right.
illness. So, but it is a choice. Um, but I had a friend who many years ago was an HR person for Pitney Bowes, and I don't even know, is Pitney Bowes still a thing? I think it is.
I don't know. I
Yeah, I
haven't
mean,
seen one of their ads for a long time.
well, I remember we used to drive the envelopes through the Pitney Bowes machine and put the
Right.
stamp on, the postage mark on it. Anyways, but she said you have to look at the big picture with any particular job. How's the commute? How are the people you're working with? How's the pay? What does the organization do? How's your boss? Does your office have a window? Is there a staff cafeteria where you get a slight discount or things like that? So it's not a simple equation about what keeps people happy or not happy. But I do think that if you work for a nonprofit where you are aligned with the mission, there is the sense that you're genuinely doing some good in the world. And that maybe on some level that makes up a little bit for the salary discrepancy between doing that and working in private equity or something. I remember working with a foster care agency, and I was thinking, even if they save over the time that I worked with them, which was a number of years, but even if they save one kid, I mean, what's a life worth? You know, I mean,
Exactly.
that's absolutely, and I felt good about doing that.
No, absolutely. I mean, we have both worked with and for nonprofits for 25 years for me, longer for you. I think we both got into it by accident. This wasn't like when we were young, it was not a professional career path that was outlined in advance. Let's put it that way.
Right?
It was just something that you kind of started getting into. We both had different backgrounds coming into the nonprofit sector. We weren't like
Yeah.
ticketed for it.
Right. But more and more, I mean, you're teaching classes
Yeah.
where, those kinds of things rarely exist. I mean, again, I've been in fundraising for since 1982. Those kinds of things it didn't exist at the time. If you wanted fundraising training, you went to the AFRP or something like that, American Association for Fundraising Professionals. But the fact that universities are offering courses in nonprofit management and in some cases fundraising specifically, I think that's really important.
In fundraising, which is topic 4, there is, I think, I sense in the students I've had over the past few years, and also some of my clients, and I'm on 4 boards, and people who I work with at the institutions whose boards I sit on, there's some burnout. There's some sense that, hey, there's a treadmill there, and whether no matter what fiscal year you're on, you start at 0 at some point, and
Yeah,
boy,
July
you
1.
you gotta start.
June 30th, you're throwing your
Yeah,
hat in the air. And July
right,
1, the clock ticks, to
right. You're like, woohoo, what a year, and then you're
yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh, we're
back
0.
to 0.
And, you know, the toolkits, the strategy in the toolkit has evolved. Certainly it has since I've been involved. It has definitely since you have. But annual campaign, capital campaigns, um, uh, institutional fundraising, board giving. The outlines are still pretty similar. But you've been at it for a long time, and now you're back to advising clients. What do you think the trends are in fundraising that, against the backdrop of of pretty much the fight to save the nonprofit sector that will be engaged in 2026, and continued cuts in funding? What do you counsel a client to pay the most attention to?
I would counsel clients to take a beat and
Mm,
take a look at, okay, this is what we've been doing for the past several years. What's really working? What's not
yeah,
working? What's old and
that's great.
tired? Are making a compelling case? I mean, there's a small university that I was on the board of for 15 years, and now I'm a trustee emeritus. But I mean, for many years, they would have an annual dinner, and I'll be frank, it got a little tiresome after a while. And then last year, and they're going to do the same this year, they turned it into a more of a cocktail reception with
Yeah.
past hors d'oeuvres, and there were a handful of speeches, and people milled around and talked to each other, but you weren't stuck at a table. And then there's music, and you feel like you should dance, and now some institutions that works for them. I mean, there are certain events that have either social status or people really do like getting together at those events, and people like getting together. Don't get me wrong at this university's events, but it's much more relaxed and much more congenial. And I don't know, it was such a big change, and plus they made so much more money doing it because the costs were so much
Right.
lower.
Right.
So it's things like that. And especially given what's going on in the world right now, in the world of philanthropy, I think it really is a time to step back and say, are we approaching this in the most effective way, the most interesting way possible?
Yeah, I totally agree. And 2 thoughts on that. I mean, one is that with galas or annual in-person fundraisers, the most important thing is obviously to raise the money. But if people are going to come or buy a table, they're going to give you the money anyway. And it's really important to focus on what your message to them is while they are a captive audience, and in advance, and follow up. I think that's like 1A, for galas. Secondly, the one piece of advice, I totally agree with you. One piece of advice I'm giving is to go talk to your most friendly program officers at foundations that are currently giving you money, and just ask them what they're hearing. Who else should I speak to? Don't go out and ask them for money. Just go have a lunch with them. What are you hearing? Who else should we be speaking to? What are the trends out there? Where are the real pressure points? What question am I not asking you that I should be asking you? That kind of stuff. I find that is incredible. That is very, very, that is time well spent.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about are relationships. I had lunch with one of the Mets most generous donors over a long period. And she said to me and she's been involved with, she supports other institutions very generously as well. And she said, it's not about asking, it's about building the relationships. And then, another board member at the New York Public Library when I was there said to me, she said that someone had said to her, it's not about asking, it's creating a place where people want to give. And part of that is, as a consultant, I was in consulting for 27 years now, back into it a bit. And, I made my career on four words: case, leadership,
Yeah.
prospect, and plan. What's your story? Who's going to help you spread that story? Who are you going to talk to? And then what's the coordinated plan behind all those things? But the first one is the case. And there have been studies done over the years where people respond emotionally before they respond intellectually. So
Yep.
how can you tell the hardest hitting story that would compel someone to give? It may not be the same story to every prospective donor. I mean, when I worked for the now non-existent, but the John O'Donnell Company back in the 80s, John used to say, you should look at your case like a kaleidoscope. The
Mm,
elements are all the same inside the viewer, but depending on how you turn it, you can slant it in different directions that would appeal to donors in this way or that way, depending on their own specific interests.
yep. Absolutely. Case, leadership, prospect, and plan. I may have heard that before.
Yeah.
Or
You've been on too many pitches with me over the years.
I may have presented that exact. There's some controversy over the authorship of those four words. Many people don't
Yeah.
like. All right, topic number 5, and honestly, this is sort of this is a big picture question, but how can institutions facing what they are facing in 2026 build greater institutional strength? What are fundraising included, but not exclusive to that? What are some things that organizations can do? And I'll start out. I think that this has got to be a year that boards really step up and understand what the job of being a director or trustee is. And it is obviously to make a gift and introduce the organization to your friends and colleagues, but it's also a responsibility to get in the trenches with the leadership of the nonprofit and help them when there are moments of crisis, which there are going to be more of this coming year. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's my nomination.
Yeah, no, I would say that that's the case. I mean, there's that organization that you and I both serve on the board of, and they had received pretty substantial in terms of the proportion of their budget, government funding, and that was cut loose this year. And the board, I think, has really stepped up in terms of you're the chair of the development committee, and we made a decision that each board member would ask 5 people for support this year. I think not only did it encourage people to do that, but it also encouraged those board members to give themselves maybe in a way that they hadn't before, or at a level that they hadn't before because of what the institution was facing. I mean, the boards of nonprofits really have essentially one role to hire and fire
Yeah.
the CEO, but I also think they have a role in fundraising. But if the board is happy with the CEO, they need to be supportive, not just financially, but also emotionally supportive. These are tough times.
Mm,
These are very, very tough times for nonprofits. And if the CEO feels as if he or she is out there or they are out there alone, it can't be.
mhm.
Again, it's about community. It's about coming together. That's so critically important.
Absolutely. Do you think that looking back at the crisis of 2025 as it unrolled, and you saw some, I'm going to focus on institutional philanthropy a little bit because it tends to drive the headlines in sort of reporting on the nonprofit sector. There were some people who kind of stepped up during 2025 to speak out, but our sector is also very decentralized and unorganized. There's not a giant nonprofit lobby. We don't necessarily wield the power that we have on an economic basis. We punch below our weight in terms of public policy. Is there a way for that to shift in the coming year, or are we waiting for a cavalry that's not going to show up?
I don't know. I mean, the additional factor I would throw into that, Tom, especially in light of what's gone on over the past year, is fear.
Mm.
Fear about stepping up and making a statement that could potentially be misconstrued or intentionally misconstrued to to criticize an organization that could be fatal to an organization. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I said this to you when you invited me to talk to you today. I want I want to be careful not to say anything that's going to harm the nonprofit sector
Yeah,
in any way, because it's
yeah,
it's 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 vital to our world in the United States. Absolutely vital. And
yep,
guess what? It's vital to the world. I mean, when you think about, I mean, USAID wasn't a nonprofit, but the government, even the governmental philanthropy, which I was, the government support of things that help people live better lives or live healthier lives. I mean, I just kind of don't understand why that has been diminished and derogated. Is that a word? you know, in so badly this year.
yeah. I mean,
And I don't think,
USAID, terrible.
yeah, yeah, but the point being that I think there is a genuine fear about being too public about disagreement with the government.
Yeah. And, that might shift as political winds shift in
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
2026. USAID, I'm actually glad you brought that up because so much of USAID's work is in partnerships with NGOs around the
yeah, yeah,
world.
yeah.
That's how they get their work done. So, your original point about community and our discussion about the longstanding partnership between the nonprofit sector and various government entities, really since about the end of the Second World War, that is civil society. That is, and the USAID was a bargain for American taxpayers. It's a tiny percentage, and what we got back in international goodwill and soft power, really, um, was money well spent. I think, and we have each worked with many organizations during our careers that have done incredible work in places around the world where people live on $2 per day, and to see that attacked, I think is really, really uh, uh, is a really horrible thing.
I mean, we're saving lives and
Yeah,
reducing suffering.
yeah, yeah.
What's wrong with that? I'd
What
like
is
to
wrong
know.
with that? That's what we do. All right, wrap up time. What is one key thought or idea or recommendation that you would have for the social sector, for civil society, for nonprofits in the coming year?
Tell the story better. I think that's, I said that before, but I think that is absolutely critical. And tell it in the most compelling way possible. And the other point I made before is take a look at how you're operating and see if there are changes that could be made, both in terms of
Mm.
your approach to fundraising, but also how are you treating your employees? Are you capable? I mean, everybody's under budgetary restraints, but are you being kind to your employees?
Mm.
There's movement towards unionization, which I'm not at all opposed to, but if organizations were more conscious of the way employees were treated, maybe that wouldn't be necessary.
Mhm.
But again, not opposed to unions, solidarity forever.
Yep. No, I agree with both of those. I would add one to your tell the story. To tell the story point. I would just say, you to a CEO or an executive director, you're going to have really hard choices this year. There's just not going to be a way to escape it. I think financially, 2026 might be worse than 2025 because of the trailing edge of federal
Yeah.
cutbacks that hits states and municipalities and counties, all of which work with nonprofits to deliver services. So I would say you're going to have difficult choices. So communicate those choices and the difficulties to your donors and to the public. Don't try to cover it up. Don't try to hide it. This is a good year for
Yeah.
transparency about what's actually happening out there.
I would agree. Good point.
Great. Steve Manzi, thank you for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure.